There was a time when Jackie Gleason's name lit up the American imagination like few others. On Saturday nights, living rooms across the nation echoed with laughter, the glow of black and white television sets casting shadows of a man whose timing was flawless and whose characters, like Ralph Kramden, became etched into the fabric of mid-century life. They called him the Great One, not just for his size or bravado, but for the way he seemed to command both comedy and command attention. He was a symphony of charisma, laughter, and undeniable talent. Yet behind that bold grin and booming voice was a man whose life would grow quieter with time, until even his home, once brimming with music and mirth, stood silent, a relic of a past too grand to last. Jackie Gleason's story is not merely one of television stardom. It is a tale filled with triumphs and tenderness, eccentricity and extravagance, but also loneliness and loss. It winds through the smoky clubs of New York, the golden sets of early television, and into sprawling Florida estates designed not just for comfort, but for retreat. His career spanned decades, his fame enormous, but his heart bore private burdens he seldom shared. Marriages frayed, health declined, and in his final years, even his own body seemed to rebel against the force that once made audiences roar with delight. Today, his properties, most notably his beloved Florida estate, stand more like monuments than homes. Glay Manor, as he called it, was a palace built for a king of laughter, complete with billiards, bars, and a sunken dining room for entertaining the most glamorous guests. And yet, in the end, the guests stopped coming. The laughter faded, and the man who once declared, "And away we go," quietly slipped away from the world he once conquered. But the question lingers, what really became of Jackie Gleason? How did a man so revered, so seemingly invincible, spend his final years in near isolation? What became of the love he found, the family he formed, the empire he built? And why does his abandoned mansion, filled with untouched memories, now serve as a ghostly echo of his larger-than-life existence? This is not just a story about an entertainer. It is the story of a man, brilliant, flawed, and deeply human. A man whose life reminds us that even legends grow old, that fame does not shield from sorrow, and that behind the curtain of celebrity, there is always a beating heart, vulnerable and real. Jackie Gleason gave the world joy. What he kept for himself is a story few truly know. Until now. Long before he became a household name, Jackie Gleason was simply Herbert John Gleason Jr., a boy from Brooklyn with a quick wit and a hunger for attention. Raised in modest circumstances by a hard-working mother after his father vanished without a trace, Gleason developed a resilience that would serve him well in show business. He found comfort in the laughter of others and discovered, early on, the power of performance as a kind of armor. Vaudeville became his first stage, and he worked tirelessly, moving from small clubs to larger audiences, always honing the timing and presence that would one day make him unforgettable. By the early 1950s, Gleason's path had taken him to the heights of the burgeoning television world. With the Jackie Gleason Show on CBS, he captivated a nation hungry for entertainment in the post-war years. Week after week, his characters brought mirth to millions, especially the ever-frustrated but endearing Ralph Kramden in The Honeymooners, a role so beloved it became cultural shorthand for a certain kind of American dreamer. Gleason's genius lay not only in his ability to make people laugh, but in his willingness to let a touch of melancholy seep through his comedy. His performances were never all polish. They had heart, a roughness, a sense of something deeply personal. But the price of greatness was steep. As Gleason's fame swelled, so too did the pressure to deliver, to stay on top in a demanding and fast-evolving industry. He was known for his perfectionism, often refusing rehearsals in favor of spontaneity, relying on instinct rather than repetition. That spontaneity created magic, but also friction, fatigue, and a grueling pace that wore heavily on him. He worked long hours, entertained relentlessly, and sought refuge not in rest, but in food, drink, and the comforts of nightlife. Friends and colleagues saw both the brilliance and the burden that came with being the Great One. Physically, the cost began to show. Even in those early years of success, Gleason's health habits raised concern. By 1952, he was smoking 6 packs of cigarettes a day, a staggering number by any standard. His diet, too, leaned toward indulgence, with heavy meals and desserts filling his table more often than vegetables. He rarely exercised, and his weight fluctuated dramatically, often ballooning or dropping by 100 pounds or more. These swings became part of his public image, even joked about. But privately they revealed deeper struggles, battles with control, stress, and a body that could not keep pace with the demands placed upon it. Author Jim Bishop would later remark in The Golden Ham that Gleason needed 3 separate wardrobes to accommodate his shifting size, a detail that symbolized more than vanity. It spoke to a man constantly reinventing his image, yet unable to fully manage the turmoil within. While audiences adored him and ratings soared, Gleason's personal well-being quietly eroded behind the scenes. And yet, he pressed on, driven by a need to perform, to entertain, to matter. In a world that applauded him for laughter, few asked what it cost to keep the smile. As the years wore on, the strain on Jackie Gleason's body became impossible to ignore. The same vitality that had once lit up television screens began to falter under the weight of years spent living large, both figuratively and literally. By the 1970s, his long-standing habits had caught up with him. The heavy smoking, the lavish meals, the absence of exercise, they all combined into a storm brewing quietly beneath the surface. Gleason, ever the showman, rarely let it show. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. It was during his 1978 theatrical tour of Larry Gelbard's Sly Fox that the toll became undeniable. In the midst of the production, Gleason began experiencing chest pains, sharp, persistent, and ominous. For a man who had built his life on timing, this was a signal that could not be ignored. He was rushed into surgery, where he underwent a triple bypass operation, a major procedure that underscored just how fragile his once imposing frame had become. Though the operation was successful, it marked a turning point. The Great One, for all his strength on stage, was no longer invincible. Still, Gleason remained determined to work. He returned to the screen, delivering performances with the same sharpness and magnetism that had defined his prime. In 1986, just a year before his passing, he starred alongside Tom Hanks in the poignant comedy drama Nothing in Common. His portrayal of a difficult, aging father was layered with vulnerability and bitterness, drawing comparisons to Archie Bunker, but delivering something more grounded, more sorrowful. Critics praised the performance, noting how it seemed to draw from Gleason's own life. The weariness, the pride, the quiet ache of a man who had once commanded rooms, but now sat in the stillness of his later years. What audiences didn't know, what even many close to him didn't fully grasp, was that Gleason was acting through real pain. During the filming of Nothing in Common, he was privately battling colon cancer. The disease had already spread to his liver, placing him in an advanced stage of illness. Yet he kept this knowledge close, choosing silence over sympathy. It was a decision in keeping with his lifelong desire to separate the performer from the man, to shield the public from the slow unraveling that fame could not prevent. Adding to the complexity of his condition were other serious health issues: phlebitis, a painful inflammation of the veins, and diabetes, which further weakened his body. It was a cruel irony that the man known for his abundance of laughter, of energy, of appetite, was now diminished by a body that could no longer sustain the demands he once placed upon it. But even in decline, Gleason carried himself with the same pride that had fueled his rise. He chose to meet his final chapter with quiet resilience, avoiding the spotlight even as his body faded behind it. On June 24, 1987, Jackie Gleason passed away at the age of 71. His untimely end marked the close of a singular life in American entertainment. But in the stillness that followed, those closest to him, and the millions who grew up with his voice and vision, were left to reflect on the price he paid to become a legend. After decades of lighting up stages and screens from coast to coast, Jackie Gleason made a decision that surprised many in the industry. In 1964, at the height of his fame, he moved his beloved television show from the fast-paced bustle of New York City to the sun-soaked shores of Miami Beach. For Gleason, it was more than a change of scenery, it was a declaration. He sought warmth, privacy, and perhaps a slower rhythm to balance the chaos of his career. That desire soon took on a grand architectural form, Gley Manor. Located in the exclusive hills of Inverary community near Fort Lauderdale, Gley Manor was Gleason's sanctuary, meticulously designed to mirror the grandeur of his public persona and the indulgence of his private life. The estate, a 14-room, 6,000-square-foot marvel, sat on the edge of a quiet lake. It was part home, part playground, and entirely a reflection of its owner's lavish taste and desire for control. Every detail, from its multiple entertainment spaces to its built-in amenities, spoke to Gleason's lifelong pursuit of comfort and command. At the center of the mansion stood a billiard room like no other. Designed with the help of Willie Mosconi, one of the greatest pool players of all time, it was both a stage and a retreat. Gleason, who loved the game nearly as much as he loved show business, often held court there with friends, celebrities, and admirers, all drawn by his charisma and the allure of the space. Nearby, a private sauna offered recovery and quiet, while an indoor aviary provided a whimsical contrast, filled with birds whose presence brought a sense of calm into the high-gloss world Gleason had built. 5 fully stocked bars were scattered across the estate, ensuring that no guest would ever find themselves without a drink in hand. Among them was a signature touch, a bottle of George Dickel Tennessee whiskey, custom-made for Gleason. It was a small emblem of a man who valued uniqueness, who never did anything halfway. These details, though seemingly extravagant, were part of how he coped. He turned his home into a world he could control, a place of abundance where the outside pressures of fame could be left at the door. The crown jewel of Gley Manor was its entertainment room, a sprawling space centered around a sunken bar and a dining area that gleamed like a fine restaurant. Here, Gleason entertained not just friends, but presidents and legends, Frank Sinatra, Gerald Ford, and others whose names carried their own weight in American culture. These gatherings were more than parties. They were declarations of relevance, moments where Gleason reaffirmed his place among the powerful and admired. But even as the home filled with laughter and clinking glasses, a quiet truth lingered in its corners. Gley Manor was not merely a place to entertain. It was also a fortress. Behind its walls, Gleason could retreat from the harsh light of aging, the silence of a waning career, and the ache of a body no longer willing to follow his lead. Years after his passing, the mansion remained almost exactly as he left it, preserved in its original decor. It stood as a time capsule of a man who once lived larger than life. For a while, it was forgotten. Then, in 2016, it was listed for sale, its price modest compared to its past, but its legacy immeasurable. Gley Manor, even empty, seemed to echo with the life it once held, and with the shadow of the man who made it his kingdom. Long before talk of alien encounters and government disclosure entered the mainstream, Jackie Gleason was quietly building a monument to the unknown. Hidden away in Cortlandt Manor, New York, stood one of the most extraordinary homes in mid-century America, an architectural curiosity shaped like a flying saucer. Gleason affectionately called it the mothership, a reflection of his fascination with the paranormal and his desire to live not just in comfort, but in mystery. Constructed in 1959, the roundhouse defied all conventions. Designed by architect Robert Sika, a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, the home married natural materials with a space-age design rarely seen in residential construction. Built inside an airplane hangar by a Swedish shipbuilder, the structure was entirely prefabricated before being transported to its final resting place on an 8.4-acre estate. Its circular design gave it an otherworldly appearance, and Gleason, never one to follow trends, relished its unconventionality. The estate was more than a single home. It included a smaller cottage nicknamed the Spaceship, a more traditional guest house known as the Barracks, and, in later years, 2 in-ground pools. These additions gave the property a resort-like charm, but it was the main house that captured imaginations. Inside, a sweeping marble spiral staircase led to a central fireplace that stood 40 feet tall and weighed over 240 tons. It was both centerpiece and statement, immense, imposing, and uniquely Gleason. True to his reputation for hosting in style, the roundhouse featured 4 fully stocked bars, one of which could seat 13 guests at once. There was even a broadcasting studio, a private haven where Gleason could create away from the glare of the stage. Yet it was his library, filled with books on the supernatural, that revealed the heart of the house. In that quiet space, Gleason indulged a lifelong curiosity about UFOs, parapsychology, and the invisible dimensions of existence. He was not shy about his beliefs. Throughout the 1950s, Gleason made late-night radio appearances with host John Nebel, discussing everything from psychic phenomena to extraterrestrial life. His thoughtful and sincere engagement with these topics surprised many who only knew him as a broad comic. But Gleason was deeply invested in these mysteries. He even penned the introduction to Nebel's biography, a gesture that reflected not just friendship, but shared fascination. Perhaps the most enduring legend surrounding the roundhouse involved an unlikely visitor, President Richard Nixon. According to writer Larry Holcomb, Gleason's enthusiasm for UFOs was well known, even in political circles. In 1973, as the story goes, Nixon allegedly took Gleason to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida to view supposed alien remains. Though the truth of that visit remains unverified, the rumor added to Gleason's mystique, drawing a connection between the entertainer, the government, and secrets hidden far from public view. Over time, the roundhouse changed hands. Gleason sold the property to CBS, and it eventually came into the possession of Pace University. In 1976, it was purchased by an orthodontist for just $150,000, a fraction of its original cost. Years later, it would be listed for $12 million, a price befitting both its architectural rarity and its storied past. At one point, it could even be rented for $4,000 a month, offering a select few the chance to step into Gleason's imagined world. Today, the roundhouse stands as more than a home. It is a physical expression of a man who saw life not just in terms of jokes and scripts, but in questions, in wonder, and in the limitless unknown. It remains one of the most peculiar and poetic pieces of his legacy, silent now, but forever pointing toward the stars. Beneath the glitter of Jackie Gleason's fame and the splendor of his homes lay a personal life marked by longing, complexity, and a search for companionship that often ended in sorrow. Though millions adored him from afar, those who stood closest to Gleason knew a man torn between his devotion to family and the demands of an all-consuming career. His path through love and marriage reflected the deep contradictions of his character. Generous yet elusive, passionate yet restless, charming yet difficult to hold. His first great romance began in the vaudeville era with Genevieve Halford, a fellow performer whose grace and steadiness offered a counterbalance to Gleason's larger-than-life personality. They married in 1936, building their union on the shared rhythm of performance life. But what had drawn them together would eventually pull them apart. Genevieve craved stability and quiet, a home untouched by the floodlights and late nights of show business. Jackie, however, was a creature of movement, of crowds, of laughter ringing in packed rooms. The dissonance between their worlds grew louder with time. By 1941, only 5 years into their marriage, the couple separated. It was the first of several breaks, but not the end. In 1948, they attempted reconciliation, trying again to bridge their differences. Together, they raised 2 daughters, Geraldine and Linda, but the tension never truly resolved. Gleason's commitments, both professional and personal, were too demanding. By 1951, another informal separation had taken place, leaving Genevieve to maintain the home while Gleason moved further into the fast-paced whirl of his career. In the margins of that life, other relationships formed. Gleason grew close to his secretary, Honey Merrill, a former showgirl and one-time Miss Hollywood, whose presence added to the swirl of rumors that often accompanied his personal affairs. In 1954, during a hospital stay following a leg injury sustained on set, Genevieve discovered another visitor at Gleason's bedside, Marilyn Taylor, a dancer from his television show. The encounter shattered what fragile bond remained between husband and wife, prompting Genevieve to file for legal separation. Yet, bound by her Catholic faith, Genevieve would not grant him a divorce until 1970. For 16 years, Gleason lived in limbo, unable to fully move on, yet no longer tethered to the domestic life they had once shared. That tension colored much of his middle years, as he pursued love with the same intensity he brought to performance, but struggled to hold it. When the divorce was finally granted, Gleason wasted no time. Just 10 days later, he married Beverly McKittrick, a secretary he'd met at a country club. Their wedding, held in Ashford, England, marked a hopeful new chapter, but it would prove short-lived. By 1975, the marriage had ended, another attempt at companionship lost to the complicated pull of his fame and temperament. Later that same year, fate returned him to Marilyn Taylor, the dancer from years earlier, the woman once caught in a storm of suspicion. They married in December of 1975, and this time, the bond held. Marilyn remained by his side until the very end, offering quiet strength as his health declined and his world narrowed. In her, Gleason seemed to find a kind of peace, a steady companion to walk with him through the twilight of his career. His legacy extended beyond his own children. His daughter Linda married actor and playwright Jason Miller, and their son, Jason Patrick, would go on to become a respected actor in his own right. Through them, Gleason's influence lived on, not just in reruns or biographies, but in flesh and blood, in talent passed down, and stories whispered through generations. Yet even in love, Jackie Gleason remained something of a mystery, forever searching, never fully still. A man surrounded by laughter, yet often alone. A man who gave so much of himself to the world, and yet held his truest self close, shared with only a few. In a career defined by movement, Jackie Gleason developed a peculiar relationship with travel, one shaped not by convenience or glamour, but by fear. While his peers jetted across the country with growing ease, Gleason clung to a more grounded mode of transportation. For him, trains were not simply an old-fashioned choice, they were a necessity. Beneath the tailored suits and booming confidence was a man haunted by a single, harrowing flight that would change his habits for the rest of his life. The story begins during the early days of his film career, a time when Gleason was expected to travel frequently between Los Angeles and New York. Airplanes, though increasingly popular, were still a source of unease for many travelers. For Gleason, that unease turned to dread after a flight bound for New York encountered a serious mechanical failure midair. 2 engines failed during the trip, forcing an emergency landing in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was a terrifying ordeal, one that left him shaken and unwilling to gamble his life in the skies again. Stranded far from home and reeling from the experience, Gleason found help in an unlikely place. A local hardware store owner, hearing of his plight, lent him $200, no small sum at the time, to purchase a train ticket back to New York. The gesture, simple and generous, seemed to mark a turning point. From that moment on, Gleason avoided flying whenever possible. He returned to the rails, drawn to the stability of the tracks and the quiet rhythm of a world that moved at a pace he could trust. While the entertainment industry barreled ahead into jet-age convenience, Gleason became something of an outlier. He arranged his work schedule around the availability of trains, even when flights would have been faster or more economical. For many years, he traveled almost exclusively by rail, often booking private compartments where he could relax, think, and prepare in solitude. The clack of the wheels, the gentle sway of the carriage, it all soothed a man whose life, otherwise, was lived at full speed. His fear of flying became well known, even endearing to colleagues and fans. It was a rare vulnerability in a man often perceived as unstoppable. The entertainer who could command a room with a single line was also someone who found the idea of being suspended in the air utterly intolerable. And yet, far from hindering his career, this fear became another layer in the legend. It set him apart, gave him an old-world charm that aligned with his larger-than-life character. In some ways, the trains reflected something deeper in Gleason's soul. They moved steadily, predictably, like the beats of his best routines. They carried him from one life to another, from stage to screen, from lover to lover. They offered space to breathe in a world that rarely paused. In choosing the rails, he wasn't just rejecting airplanes. He was choosing control, privacy, and a rhythm more in tune with his inner tempo. Even as his health declined in later years, Gleason rarely discussed the old flight that had scarred him. He spoke more often about trains, how much he loved them, how comfortable they made him feel. To those who knew him well, the preference wasn't just about safety. It was about staying grounded in a world that so often spun out of control. For Gleason, who had conquered the heights of television fame, staying close to the earth may have been the only place he ever felt truly safe. Away from the bright lights and roaring applause, Jackie Gleason retreated into a private world that few ever saw. It wasn't a world filled with scripts or spotlight. It was lined with books. Thousands of them. Subjects range from the metaphysical to the mystical, volumes covering parapsychology, extraterrestrial phenomena, and life beyond the known. This wasn't a passing interest. It was a deep and consuming passion, and the sanctuary for this curiosity was his private library, a quiet refuge where the Great One became simply a student. Gleason's fascination with the paranormal began early, though it was rarely discussed in public at the time. During the 1950s, he became a frequent guest on the late-night radio program hosted by John Nebel, one of the earliest voices to bring fringe science and supernatural topics to mainstream audiences. Gleason didn't just appear on the show. He engaged, questioned, speculated. His presence gave the program a sense of credibility, elevating its curious content with the stature of a national celebrity who took the question seriously. But Gleason didn't stop at conversation. He built a robust personal library, one of the most extensive private collections of paranormal literature in the country at the time. Topics range from government cover-ups to psychic research, from UFO sightings to theories of life after death. These books were not novelties. They were dog-eared and read, underlined and noted, suggesting a mind genuinely engaged with the unknown. For a man known for his jokes and larger-than-life antics, this intellectual depth surprised many who thought they knew him. His admiration for Nebel extended beyond the airwaves. Gleason wrote the introduction to Donald Bain's biography of the broadcaster, a move that further affirmed his serious engagement with the material. He believed in the possibility of truths hidden beneath ridicule, in mysteries dismissed too easily by polite society. In a world where entertainers were often expected to play only one role, Gleason carved out a space for the curious mind behind the performer's face. Following his passing in 1987, the extent of his fascination became even clearer. His entire collection, hundreds upon hundreds of books, was donated to the University of Miami. It was a gesture both generous and revealing, a final offering from a man who spent his life making people laugh, but who, in his quietest moments, searched earnestly for something more. In those late years, as his health declined and his world grew smaller, Gleason spent more time in his library. There, away from the echo of applause, he immersed himself in questions that fame could not answer. Was there life beyond this one? Were we alone in the universe? Did the soul survive the body? These were not idle musings. They were his true pursuits, pursued not with desperation, but with a sincere hunger for understanding. In truth, the library was perhaps the most intimate part of Jackie Gleason's legacy. It showed a man deeply invested in the mysteries of existence, one who refused to accept only what could be seen. He had spent his life mastering the art of performance, but behind closed doors, he was always listening for something beyond the stage, something eternal. By the mid-1980s, the exuberant energy that had once defined Jackie Gleason began to give way to something quieter, something more reflective. Age was catching up with the Great One, and behind his ever-present smile, the years of excess and exertion had taken a toll. He was still working, still drawing admiration for his performances, but those closest to him could sense a change. The grand gestures grew fewer, the parties less frequent, and while his presence remained commanding, his body was waging battles he chose not to reveal. It was during the filming of Nothing in Common in 1986, alongside a rising young actor named Tom Hanks, that Gleason delivered what many now regard as his final masterwork. He played a stern, stubborn father grappling with illness and estrangement, a role marked by sharp humor and aching vulnerability. Critics praised the performance for its honesty, noting how Gleason seemed to pour something deeply personal into the character. What they didn't know at the time was how close art had come to life. Privately, Gleason had been diagnosed with colon cancer. The disease had spread to his liver, and his condition was advanced. Yet he chose silence over spectacle. He told few people, shielding even friends and longtime colleagues from the severity of his illness. In addition to cancer, he was also suffering from phlebitis, a painful inflammation of the veins, and diabetes, a condition that only complicated his treatment options. Despite all this, he pressed on, determined not to let the world see him weakened. There were no grand announcements, no tabloid confessions or dramatic interviews. Gleason, who had once been larger than life on stage and in every room he entered, shrank away from the public gaze in his final year. He retreated to his home in Florida, a place where he could rest surrounded by familiar comforts and those he loved most. His wife, Marilyn Taylor, remained at his side, a quiet companion in those final days. On June 24, 1987, Jackie Gleason passed away at the age of 71. There was no long hospital vigil, no public parade of grief. His departure was as private as the final years of his life had become. A quiet closing to a story once filled with thunder. A funeral mass was held at the Cathedral of St. Mary in Miami, a fitting tribute to Gleason's Catholic faith. The ceremony, solemn and dignified, was attended by family, close friends, and a few remaining colleagues from his long career. He was then laid to rest in a private outdoor mausoleum at Our Lady of Mercy Catholic Cemetery in Miami. There, in a peaceful, sunlit corner of the grounds, his sarcophagus was placed beneath a plaque bearing only his name and the words, "And away we go." Beside him lies his sister-in-law, June Taylor, the famed choreographer who had long been part of both his personal and professional life, and her husband, Saul Lerner. The arrangement spoke to a closeness that endured beyond the stage, a quiet reminder of the bonds that mattered most as the spotlight dimmed. Gleason's death marked more than the end of an entertainer. It marked the closing of a particular chapter in American popular culture, one filled with brassy music, big laughs, and even bigger personalities. And yet, the man at the center of it all had exited with grace, leaving behind no spectacle, only silence. Long after Jackie Gleason's voice fell silent, his presence continued to linger, in old film reels, in reruns crackling on late-night television, and most hauntingly, in the places he left behind. The grandeur he built for himself, the homes he so carefully crafted, now stand as quiet monuments to a man who once seemed unstoppable. Among them, Gley Manor remains perhaps the most poignant. Once filled with music, laughter, and the swirl of high society, it now sits with its curtains drawn, its walls echoing only memory. That silence has become part of his story. In life, Gleason commanded attention with ease, but in death, he receded into stillness, leaving behind unanswered questions and abandoned spaces. His mansion in Florida, preserved with many of its original furnishings, tells a tale more revealing than words ever could. A story of a man who lived not just for fame, but for control, comfort, and beauty on his own terms. Visitors speak of its eerie calm, the way time seems frozen in each room, as though the party paused but never truly ended. And then there was the Roundhouse in New York, a creation so unusual, so brimming with imagination that it defied every norm. It was more than a home, it was a statement about belief, about curiosity, about the unseen. For Gleason, it served as a symbol of his eccentricities, his defiance of conformity, and his deep yearning to explore worlds both within and beyond. But perhaps his greatest legacy lies not in real estate, or even in performance. It lies in his contradictions. Jackie Gleason was a man who made the world laugh while nursing his own private pain. He built kingdoms only to retreat from them. He was both indulgent and searching, dazzling and solemn. He offered his audiences joy, yet sought solace in shadows. His was a life of dualities, between fame and solitude, celebration and silence, earthly success and metaphysical wonder. He was one of the most recognizable entertainers of the 20th century, and yet, in the end, he left behind a mystery that only deepens with time. Jackie Gleason didn't simply perform. He lived as though the stage extended into every corner of his world. But when the curtain finally fell, what remained were not just the echoes of his punchlines or the glow of his celebrity. What remained was the quiet ache of a man who gave so much of himself to millions and kept only fragments for his own peace. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era.